This is your 240 Q&A time writing. Your proper names are Mr. Todd, Deposition Exhibit Number 1, Deposition Exhibit 2, Deposition Exhibit 3, Deposition Exhibit Number 4, Deposition Exhibit Number 5, Exhibit Number 6, Deposition Exhibit 7, Mr. Niels B, Deposition Exhibit 8, and Mr. Wilkes. Ready? Mr. Todd, I'll hand you what's been marked Deposition Exhibit Number 1 and ask you if you recognize that document.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that is?
This is a deposit agreement, and it's a document wherein we acknowledge receipt of a certain amount of funds, and the borrower also acknowledges that he's paid us a certain amount of money, and in effect, he agrees to pay additional funds subject to our providing him financing on whatever the terms of the loan application might have been.
Do you know whether a copy of this deposit agreement was ever signed?
I'm sure it was. You know, it's standard operating procedure. The borrower says, I'm not going to give you any money unless you receipt for it.
Now, Mr. Todd, would you please take a look at what's been marked as Deposition Exhibit 2 and tell me if you recognize that document?
Yes, this is a loan application wherein we spell out, the terms and conditions that we are proposing to obtain financing for a borrower.
Is this document dated January 15, 1986?
Yes.
Is the deposit agreement also dated January 15, 1986?
Yes, that's correct.
Does that make it seem likely that the deposit agreement refers to this particular loan application?
I don't think there's any question about it.
Now, this loan application is for a loan for a term of 20 years, is it not?
That's right.
There are some handwritten changes in this loan application, and I wonder if you would look at those and tell me what you can recall about the circumstances for those changes having been made.
I really don't remember I'll just have to guess. I don't remember, frankly.
Mr. Todd, would you look at what's been marked Deposition Exhibit 3?
This is what we consider to classify as a loan commitment, spelling out the terms and conditions upon which we are prepared to make a loan.
Do you recall preparing this commitment?
I can't remember, physically sitting down and dictating it and so forth and so on, but obviously I did do it.
Would this commitment you referred to, Mr. Todd, be the alternative that you described earlier, where you were considering making a permanent mortgage bond financing for the project?
Well, when you say an alternative, I'm not so sure. This commitment was in effect spelling out the terms and conditions according to which we were willing to make a single mortgage bond financing transaction out of the permanent loan as a permanent loan.
Mr. Todd, I'll hand you what's been marked as Deposition Exhibit Number 4 and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes.
Is that a letter that you received?
I'm sure we did.
Do you know what the purpose of this letter was?
In order for us to be able to do what was called for here.
In Deposition Exhibit 3?
Yes. The commitment was issued in the name of the bank.
Now, Mr. Todd, would you look at Deposition Exhibit 5 and tell me what that document is?
This is the letter to the people. They are one of the entities we work with.
Did they have an interest in it?
Well, yes, they did. And it was during this process, of course, and as we were talking here about a 12% rate, there I indicate that the borrower was willing to take 11. I'm not sure what the final rate was that they were willing to do this at, but they did have an interest in doing it, yes.
And you don't recall why it was that they didn't do it?
Well, I'm sure, as I mentioned earlier, that the rate was higher than what he felt that he was willing to accept.
Mr. Todd, the copy of this letter that we received did not have an attachment, and you refer in your first sentence here to a tax-exempt mortgage bond presentation. Do you remember roughly what that presentation looked like?
Yes, I'm sure we have got something in our files here, but it was a summary where we indicated the nature of the project, the cost, the borrower.
So you think it was maybe 2 or 3 pages?
Yes, I'm sure. Typically, that's what it is. It's a standard kind of presentation that we make.
The typewritten?
Typewritten, right. And I'm sure there's something in the file on that would spell that out, that would support what we are saying here.
I'll hand you what's been marked as Exhibit Number 6 and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes.
Is this a letter to you from the bank?
That's correct.
Is it fair to say, Mr. Todd, that by the date of this letter, March 5, 1986, it had been decided that you and your organization were not going to do the whole permanent financing of this project?
That's right.
Now, would you tell me if you recognize what's been marked as Deposition Exhibit 7?
Yes, sir.
Is that a letter that you wrote to Mr. Niels?
Yes, it's a letter I wrote to Mr. Niels.
Paragraph small b has been crossed out. Are you aware of the circumstances for that change?
I can't say precisely what precipitated that removal of the paragraph, but I would assume that they provided some evidence that provision had been satisfied.
In other words, that the expiration date had already been extended.
Had been extended.
Why were you interested, as evidenced in paragraph A, in an assurance that the interest rate on the bonds didn't exceed 12%?
After looking at that and relating it to the conditional commitment, I'm inclined to think that if we were to check the conditional commitment, that they probably had a rate beyond which they would not agree to guarantee the loan. Could not, perhaps.
You were just interested that the financing conformed to the requirement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Todd, will you tell me if you recognize what's been marked as Deposition Exhibit 8?
This is a letter from Mr. Wilkes assuring us that the company was prepared to meet the requirements of paragraph 16 of the commitment.
Did you request that Mr. Wilkes send you this letter?
I'm sure we did.
Is there any particular reason why you required that assurance at that time?
Well, what we try to do is, we try to make sure that all of the terms and conditions of a commitment are complied with before we close, our construction loan, or before we decide to make a loan. And sometimes we think it's appropriate that the borrower, or maybe in some cases a builder who is involved perhaps, there may be a requirement involving construction, or quite often we want certain things in writing from those third parties that they are aware of what our requirements are.
Okay, I see.
They may look at the guarantee commitment and sort of glance over, or not really fully understand exactly what everything is that they are required to comply.
This is all together, right?
Yes.
This is your first Q&A correction. This is your first Q&A time writing at 225 words per minute. Your proper names are Mr. Todd, Deposition Exhibit 9, Mr. Niels, Deposition Exhibit 7, Exhibit number 10, A issue, B issue, Deposition Exhibit 11, Deposition Exhibit number 12, Exhibit 13, Exhibit 14A, Exhibit 14B, Deposition Exhibit 15, and Mr. Wilkes. Ready? Now, Mr. Todd, will you look at Deposition Exhibit 9 and tell me if you recognize that?
Yes, this is a letter sent from Mr. Niels from the bank assuring us of certain things that the bank is committed to do.
It's your understanding that this letter was a response to your letter that's been marked as Deposition Exhibit 7?
Yes.
Was this letter satisfactory to you? Was there anything in this letter that you had any question about or objection to?
I don't know whether I called Mr. Niels subsequent to the receipt of this letter or not. I just don't remember.
Now, would you look at Exhibit number 10, Mr. Todd, and tell me if you recognize that document?
Yes. This is a letter that we sent to the bank, to Mr. Niels, outlining specifically the terms and conditions that must be met in order for us to buy the unguaranteed portion of this financing.
Was it your understanding that you were agreeing to purchase the bond or bond issue, a series of bonds?
Well, as I remember, I'm just going to have to do some recollections. It seemed to me like they were going to be two issues, an A issue and a B issue.
That bond would represent the unguaranteed portion of the financing, is that correct?
That would represent the unguaranteed portion, that's correct.
In this letter, were you making it a requirement of your participation of this financing that you be provided with no less than 70 leases? And I'm looking at paragraph number 9 right now. No less than 70 leases in connection with your participation in this financing.
That's correct.
Mr. Todd, would you look at Deposition Exhibit 11 and tell me what that is?
This is a letter to the bank where we at that time had established bank lines of credit, and we were asking the bank to approve or to give us permission to borrow against the note and deed of trust on the construction loan.
It was for the construction loan?
It was for the construction loan.
Now, Mr. Todd, will you look at Deposition Exhibit number 12 and tell me if you can identify that?
This is a letter to our bondsmen in connection with our involvement in this.
Now, Mr. Todd, will you look at what's been marked at Exhibit 13?
Yes.
This is 2 pages. Do you recognize both of those?
Well, it's our loan closing statement, and I'm guessing one is probably a work copy and the other is a typed copy of the same data.
Does the typed copy have a signature as well?
Yes.
I notice on the work copy it indicates a term of 2 months for the loan. Do you see that?
Let's see here. Term. Where do you see that? 2 months, yes.
Is that correct? And on the final signed copy, I see that that number has been changed to 3 months. Would that reflect some discussions between you and the borrower?
Well, it may have been that the file, maybe the communication to our home closing department wasn't as precise and as definitive as it should have been.
Do you remember the closing of this loan?
Now, when you say remember, can you define a little more precisely what you mean?
Sure. Maybe I should ask you whether there was a formal closing, whether the other signatories to the loan documents all were present in a room for the signing of the documents evidencing the construction loan.
I presume there was. I wasn't present.
You were not. All right. Would someone from your organization have been present at such a closing?
Yes.
Mr. Todd, this Exhibit 13 indicates that the loan closing occurred on April 2, 1986.
Yes.
As I understand your testimony, you first began talking with people from the corporation in the summer or fall of 1985. Is that correct?
I think so, yes.
Mr. Todd, I'm going to hand you 2 documents. One is marked Exhibit 14A and the other is marked Exhibit 14B. Maybe you can tell me what these two documents are.
Well, they both say loan agreements on them.
They both purport to be loan agreements between the mortgage company and the corporation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There are just one or two differences in these two documents, and I just wanted to ask you if you could clarify why those differences exist.
Okay. Would you point them out?
I'll point them out to you. On page 4 in paragraph 2.2, you'll notice that the amounts of the fee that's governed by that provision are different as between the two versions of these agreements.
Okay.
And I wonder if you can tell me the reason for that difference.
I sure can't. I guess we didn't charge enough. I'm glad you brought that to my attention.
I'd also like to call to your attention that both of these agreements appear to be signed. Is that correct, Mr. Todd?
They are both signed.
You have already testified that you were not present at that loan closing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Todd, I'm handing you Deposition Exhibit 15. Can you tell me what that is?
Yes. This was a document wherein we changed certain terms and conditions, provisions, etc. of the loan agreement.
Do you know why these changes were made?
I wouldn't say this is a standard agreement, but the basic sum and substance is the form of loan agreement that we use on all of our loans, and then we modify them from time to time to meet specific circumstances, certain characteristics of a given loan.
But it's not uncommon then, is that correct, that you would have a form such as this to accompany a loan closing, a set of loan closing documents?
We prefer to modify our loan agreement, incorporate the changes in the loan agreement before we, put together the final agreement. So I don't know for sure.
I'd like you to look now, Mr. Todd, at what's been marked as Exhibit 16 and tell me what that is.
I'm sure that Mr. Wilkes had voiced some disagreement or surprise or questioned the issue of legal fees that we charged when we closed the loan, and this was to pacify him to some degree.
Mr. Todd, do you recall Mr. Wilkes in your presence objecting to signing any documents pertaining to this financing?
I think he did object. In fact, I think there's a letter here somewhere, some correspondence here, where he wanted us to go back and change the rate, refund fees, and a lot of...
Okay, this is your second Q&A time writing at 225 words per minute. Your proper names are Dr. Miller, Symbol, Hysterectomy, and 21st Street. Ready? Were you working at the time of this accident?
No.
Before the accident, when had you last worked regularly?
About a year.
About a year before the accident?
Yes.
Well, what did he give you by way of medicine or treatment or therapy or whatever?
Well, he gave me a couple of things in the vein, I think, that day. He gave me a prescription. He said there wasn't too much that he could do until he could get the muscles to loosen up.
Do you know what prescriptions they were? Did you have them renewed?
Yes, I've been on them ever since.
Had you ever injured yourself before?
No.
No broken bones?
No.
No concussions as a child? Nothing?
Nothing.
All right, let me ask the questions this way. This day that you saw Dr. Miller, did you get worse than that, or was that the worst that it ever was at that point?
I even got worse after I saw him that day. I just seemed to be getting tighter and tighter.
He didn't put you in the hospital at that point?
No.
Did he ever put you in the hospital?
No.
Did he ever send you in for therapy?
No. He's got them therapy machines there and stuff. And then he had another machine that he was using this stuff.
All right. He didn't put you in traction?
Yes.
He did put you in traction.
Well, the machine is like, in a sense, traction. But at home, I wasn't in traction.
But he didn't stretch you in any way with the machine?
Yes. He tried to pull my neck, but he didn't do that, I don't think, until at least it was a week and a half after the accident because I was so tight. I couldn't stand to have him touch me. Somebody looked like they were going to touch me, I would just scream.
How often have you seen him, just roughly?
Oh, it started out a couple of times a week, and then it went to once a week and then every 2 weeks if I get a little overactive. I just kind of have to watch what I do.
What kind of things bring on an onset of pain?
I can run my vacuum and put myself in the bed for 2 days.
What about running the vacuum?
I guess it's just the actual pulling of the neck, the way a woman vacuums and stuff, I guess. The pulling of the neck, and my neck will get real tight across here, and I just can hardly move my head sometimes.
Have you taken drugs today?
No.
So you are not in any pain now?
Just my headache, but I've learned to live with them. I can't eat aspirins all the time. I do get headaches, terrible headaches, and they last sometimes as high as 2 and 3 weeks at a time.
And you never had headaches before?
Never.
What does Dr. Miller say the problem is?
He just says it comes from the neck muscles down in here tightening up and stuff. If the headaches get real bad, I will go in and he will loosen it up, and it seems to alleviate the headaches sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't even help.
How often are you having these real bad headaches now?
It's hard to say. See, just like this headache that I've got right now, it's been with me for about 2 weeks now.
Does it affect your vision at all?
No, it just makes me irritable when my head gets to hurting like this.
Does it affect your hearing?
Some.
What is it that you can't hear?
Well, if you get real soft-spoken or somebody speaks real soft to me, it seems like it makes it hard for me to hear if my head is hurting.
Have you told the doctors about this?
The headaches I've told him about.
Have you told anyone about the hearing loss?
No, because I've just noticed the hearing here in the last, several weeks. Somebody getting real soft-spoken with me, it seems to be affecting my hearing more and more here lately. My head will get to hurting so bad that it just sounds like somebody is beating those cymbals or tin, and it just echoes out.
And you are not taking aspirin for this?
I take them, but it doesn't seem to help.
It doesn't help at all?
Sometimes it will take that cymbal sound away, but the headache stays with me.
Have you asked your doctor for some drugs to get rid of this headache?
No, I've told him about the headaches, and I figured if he thought I needed the drugs, he would put me on them.
And your headaches are not always accompanied by a neck spasm?
They're also accompanied. I can feel my neck getting tight, and I can say, here we go with a headache.
Did you have a neck spasm this morning?
Yes.
It doesn't seem to bother you raising your arms or turning your head.
I'm so stiff and sore that I'm just moving good. Yes, it does hurt me today.
Were you taking any drugs at the time of this accident?
No.
Have you ever taken tranquilizers or any other drug of that nature?
I took a mild tranquilizer. It will be 2 years this month.
Who prescribed those?
Dr. Miller.
What was he prescribing them for?
I had just gotten over a complete hysterectomy, and my nerves were kind of bad at the time. And they were real mild tranquilizers. In fact, I didn't take them for more than a month.
And are you taking tranquilizers now?
No.
Do you feel like you are getting any better, or that you have reached a plateau and you are never going to get any better? Or how do you feel about it?
At times I feel better, and like I say, I can go and do just a normal thing and it will just set me back. My neck will get stiff and my back will start hurting me, and then I have to rest a couple or 3 days.
What about things like bowling and swimming and that kind of thing?
Yes.
Did you used to do those things?
I used to do them all the time, but I don't do them now.
Where did you used to bowl?
We used to go up to the one on 21st Street. We used to bowl up there all the time.
How often? Once a week, once a month, or what?
Oh, we used to average at least once a month. Sometimes more often, sometimes not so often.
That would... Oh, sorry. Closed my eye for a second. Oh, did we stop this?
Yes.
No, we didn't.
Oh, I mean, no, stop it.
Okay, so stop it.